When writing a story, there are many histories and fables that authors use and adapt to make their stories interesting or that they just use for general inspiration. But simply reusing stories and copying exactly what happened into the story is not enough, right? Because you need to add something new to make the viewing experience fresh and interesting for the viewers. But, if you just use everything the way it is in history and just change it and adapt it to the world building that's happening in this story, then it just feels like a reskinned version of some whatever historic event or fable. Now, I know there's a lot of series that do this, they basically retell historic events, but I'd like to argue that even those ones don't just retell historic events. They add something different to the experience that makes it interesting and makes you want to watch it despite it just being a historic event. And today we're here to look at what Attack on Titan did to make it feel different and to take, a historic event and change it so that you probably don't even notice that it's a historic event anymore. And the main method for doing this was just asking two simple questions. When faced with impossibly difficult decisions, what would you do? Or in another way, what is the right choice? So for this video, I'm assuming you've watched to the end of Season 4 Part 2 of Attack on Titan, or Episode 87 if you just count them throughout. And I'll be talking about a lot of the plot, so you probably don't want to be spoiled, but if you've watched it or you just don't care, then feel free. And for those of you who've read the manga to the end, just relax yourself, this is not the time for proving that you've read the manga. So the first inspiration in Attack on Titan comes from Jack and the Beanstalk, a very famous story that, is very obvious because of the fact that Attack on Titan has giants and Jack and the Beanstalk is about a boy and a giant. So very simple. And what's interesting about this is not that it's used once, but it's used twice in a subtle way, which goes back to the question of, what would you do and what's the right choice? But for the viewers, who should you vote for? And the first way it's used is in a very simple that, there's people in the world who are afraid of the giants that are going to eat them. That's it. It's as simple as that. But the second way it's used is that not only are the people in the walls afraid of these giants, and so we feel like, we need to support the people in the walls, but on a deeper level, you find out that the people in the walls who are the Eldian nation are the people who turn into giants. And so the rest of the world is afraid of them because they do so. Now, if you've read Jack and the Giant Beanstalk, or is it Jack and the Beanstalk? You know that it's about a boy named Jack who goes and sells a cow for some magic beans, and then these beans turn into a beanstalk that lead him to a land of giants. And then in this land of giants, he takes some opportunity while the giant is sleeping and a bit ignorant to steal his golden goose, and then he runs away, chops the tree so that the giant can't follow him, and the giant falls, dies, and he lives with his mother happily ever after stealing treasure from the giant. Now, on the other hand, like I was saying, the Eldians turn into giants. So in some way, you look at the story and you realize that the Marlians, in one aspect, are Jack, the nation that needed resources, and so they went to the land of the Eldians, or the land of the giants, in order to steal their golden goose, the founding titan, and use that so that they can live happily ever after and kill the giants that live in the land of giants or on the island of paradise. But like I said at the beginning, simply telling this story isn't what's interesting about Attack on Titan. What's interesting is what's been added. And what's been added is what's always being added the whole story through. The question of what is the right decision. Because normally when we read the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, you want to vote for Jack. A poor boy who's just trying to, live and, get by with his mom. And so you want to vote for Jack. But in this version of the story, who is Jack? Is Jack the Marlians who were oppressed by the Eldians? And now they just want to, keep on surviving, get resources and grow as a nation? Or is it the Eldians who are afraid and are being attacked for some reason that they don't even understand? So at the end of the day, coming back to the question of what's the right choice or who should we support, it all comes back to the idea that Attack on Titan is trying to bring, that it's very easy to be both innocent and guilty, and at the end of the day, no side of an argument or a war is completely innocent, neither are they completely guilty. And you could unintentionally find yourself as the villain in someone else's story. Now moving on to a possibly even greater source of inspiration for the actual plot of the series, I want to talk about Attack on Titan and the inspirations with Germany. Now, I know there's a lot out there, comparing the names of characters, comparing the architecture of how it looks like inside the walls, maybe even the uniforms as well. But I'm not even talking about any of that. I'm talking about the actual plot of the story and the way it plays out, and how that's similar to Germany in the beginning of the 20th century, the early 1900s, and everything involved in there. But a quick disclaimer before I get into that. Yeah, I'm not a history expert, so I'm not going to go into too many details and too many parallels. That's for those of you guys who are history experts and you want to look at all the parallels, feel free to do that, knock yourself out. But the story starts from 2,000 years ago, with a girl named Ymir who lives in a village that is at some point taken over by the Eldian kingdom, and they are forced into serving them. At some point, Ymir gets the power of the Titans, and once again she's forced into fighting their battles, and based off the fact that she turns into a literal giant, it's easy to see how people would focus on her instead of the people who actually started the war, the Eldian Empire, not really the subjects of Ymir. But it's a bit similar to World War One, because at the end of the day, Germany didn't actually start the First World War. That was Austria-Hungary. But very quickly, Germany became the face of it and the main fighting force of that war, just like the Eldians did in Attack on Titan. And it's very easy to see how, neither side started this war, but everyone hates them for it, and they became the face of, the bad guys in both our world and in the world of Attack on Titan. Now, obviously, the situation is not the same. Germany was not enslaved or oppressed. They chose to do that because they wanted to, but the point still stands, they did not start it, and that's a fact. In the end, the First World War comes to some kind of a vague conclusion where Germany decides to stop and everyone decides to stop fighting due to various subtle reasons. But kind of like the war in Attack on Titan, the Eldian King decides that he's going to renounce war, and that him and his people are going to go and live the rest of their days inside the walls and die a slow death over time in a peaceful way. Somewhat. A bit similar to the real world where after World War One, there was a meeting where all the countries came together and they decided, we need some reparations. And so Germany was the one who was forced to give reparations to all the other countries. And that left them severely broke, poor, starving, dying a slow death in somewhat of another peaceful way. But like I said, it's not just about the parallel. It's about the question, what is the right choice? In Attack on Titan, was it the correct decision to stop war? Was it the correct decision to erase the minds of your people and leave them to die in ignorance, a slow death? Should they have given up long before, or should they have just kept fighting? And you see, it's here where, the connections, you stop thinking about World War One and you just focus on what do you do in such an impossible situation. And that's where the intrigue of the series is. It's not about just, the one-for-one parallel with history. It's about asking the viewers a question and making them think about it as they keep watching the series. And this is where, the real intrigue in Attack on Titan lies. Well, this and the mystery aspect, but we're talking about this today. In the 100 years that follow the Titan War, aka 2,000 years in the future, we see how the Eldians have struggled and grown increasingly hopeless even before the Colossal Titan shows up. In episode 1, we see how most people have just accepted that they live inside the walls and that's just the way life is. Everyone seemingly apart from a young boy who wants to pursue freedom to the utmost and believes that being caged up like animals is no way to live. Now this young boy, also known as Eren Yeager, kind of resembles a very young Adolf in his younger days. Someone who wanted to preach their ideals and dreams to everyone, but really at the end of the day only got support from his closest friends. In the 1900s, when the National Socialists first ran to take over the country, they received less than 3% of the votes. But just a few years later, when they ran again, they received almost all the votes, the only difference being the Great Depression. You see, the country was already bankrupt because of the effects of World War I, and people were already living less than ideal lives. But because of the Great Depression, everything in the country went from bad to worse, and you can look it up yourself, right? People had wheelbarrows of money in which the wheelbarrow was more valuable than the money in the wheelbarrow. And so at this point, the people were pushed to the extent that they would rely on anyone and anything to get them out of this situation. And that's where our favorite historic figure jumps in as a solution to the country's problems and leads them to a brighter future. Well, promises to lead them to a brighter future. And we see a similar thing in Attack on Titan. When Eren's introduced and he becomes a scout, no one really cares about Eren. Apart from his power, no one actually wants to listen to what Eren has to say or has to offer. Everyone just cares about his power being a beacon of hope, and that's it. But later in the series, when they find out that the entire world wants to kill them and they have no option but to die, then everyone looks to Eren because Eren comes up with a plan that gives them a hope and a future. And so just like our favorite historic figure, he has his own party that goes ahead and starts eliminating all the threats and all the leaders in the country to make Eren the sole leader, hope, and power that will help bring them to a brighter future, aka the Jaegerists. Now what makes Eren different from our favorite historic German is seeing Eren grow. Unlike the myths and stories we hear of Adolf, we actually see Eren go from a young child, see what shapes him into the person he's become. And actually we see more of his story than everyone else in the world's story. We see him grow up, we see him face fear and danger, and we see him persevere because he has a pure goal and because he wants everyone to have a better future. And that's what makes us want to vote for him. We may not agree with, how childish he is at the beginning, but we think that he's on the right path, right? You'd want to follow him and, reach that goal. Maybe not follow him, but attain the goal with him. And that's the difference, right? It's all a matter of perspective. Normally when wars are fought, the history is written from the perspective of the winners. But in Attack on Titan, we see a parallel that does not take the perspective of the winners, but the losers. Does this mean that in the end, the Eldians will lose? I don't know. It's not about predicting, this is just about comparing the stories. Point is, seeing the side of, what would be the losers makes you feel different about the story, the characters, and makes you vote for someone who you probably wouldn't vote for otherwise if we'd seen maybe Marley's history or something like Theo Magath's history in the Attack on Titan story. Now, there are other parallels we could go into, such as maybe Germany forming pacts with Japan and Italy, and how that's kind of like Eldians forming a pact with the Hizuru group, and some of the volunteers who seem Italian, like Niccolo. But I'm sure you see the point and the parallels of how the story and evolution of Germany is kind of like the evolution of the Eldian Empire, or the subjects of Ymir. And although I've made many comparisons, I think one thing that makes Attack on Titan interesting is that you're not worried about your opinions on the Attack on Titan situation mirroring what you think about World War II and what that means for you as a person, because at the end of the day, there's no man-eating giants in our world, so it's a very different conversation talking about the anime versus talking about history. And that's what makes it great. It's not just retelling the story, but it's taking a subject from the story and asking an important question based on that subject. In Attack on Titan, we see a poor village go from harmless and innocent to slaves and finally turn into demons. And this is not just the Eldian Kingdom, but really every nation in the Attack on Titan world. Like I said at the beginning in the Jack and the Beanstalk parallel, it's very easy to be both the oppressor and the victim at the same time, and it just depends whose story you're looking at it from. Whose perspective are you taking on the matter? And we see this over and over again in Attack on Titan. Hanji willingly becomes the torturer, but can't seem to come to some kind of verdict on what should happen in the world, but has some kind of a moral compass like Gelsanis. Levi turns into the easy killer who will not stop actually killing people until he knows that all the fighting and all the death has been worth it, just like Kenny. Eren turns into this warrior of protection and freedom who never stop moving forward, just like Reiner. Armin becomes this timid but, killer, powerful being who understands that sometimes you can't talk it out, and some people just need to die because what we need to achieve is greater than this, just like Bro thought. And Gabby turns into a devil who realizes that maybe she's the one killing the innocent Eldians, the good Eldians. And this list could go on and on with so many characters in the series, most importantly with Eldia and Marley, who always at some point seem to be the victim and the oppressor. It's a story trope that I like, one where a character looks at another character or a system and says, "This is so far from ideal and they make such bad decisions, I am never going to be like this." But through their life and their experiences, at some point they realize that they're exactly at the point that they said that they would never be. They have become exactly what they hated and grew up trying not to become. And at this point they realize that life is harder than it seems, and maybe the people before me made the choices that they made because it was the best thing that they knew. And they were trying to do the best, just like I'm trying to do the best. At the end of the day, the parallels, like I said, are not the most important thing. The most important thing is the question that's being asked in Attack on Titan. When faced with impossibly difficult situations, what is the right decision? And normally we try to make the right decision based off of, does this decision hurt someone else and what good or bad comes of it? But what happens when there's no such option, when all the options just have bad side effects? What becomes the best option there? Now, at the start of this video I mentioned that there's two important questions, but the whole video I've only talked about one. And the other question is, when faced with a hell where all decisions that we make are bad, what then informs the decisions that we make? In the names of what do we keep pushing forward or making decisions? Attack on Titan uses this scenario, right? This exact scenario to ask us this question. Using a very controversial time in history, depending on, your perspective on the matter, to really ask, in a difficult situation like the one in Attack on Titan, what is the right answer? Do you just die and allow people to kill you? Do you commit genocide in the name of self-preservation? Or is genocide never the answer? Would you die before committing genocide? One of the characters in the series who gives us half the answer to how we should make these decisions is Levi Ackerman. And he says, "I don't know which option you should choose, and I could never advise you on that. No matter what kind of wisdom dictates you the option to pick, no one will be able to tell if it's a right or wrong decision until you arrive at some sort of outcome from your choice. The only thing we're allowed to do is believe that we won't regret the choice we made." Quite the quote. The other half is given by Kenny, who mentions that we're all the same, and we all have difficult situations relative to our lives. And at the end of the day, we all make decisions based on pleasure, women, God, family, leaders, dreams and ambition, power, and children. Based on these two characters, the answer to a right decision is never about hurting or pleasing everyone. It's about following through with your most important motivation. Because we're human, and sometimes we'll just never be able to find the right answer until afterwards. At the end of the day, the most important thing about telling an anime or story using history or fables is not just about telling the event all over again. It's about telling a message, getting something across to the viewers. And in Attack on Titan, it's about questioning our motives, our decision making, putting us in scenarios that are impossible because, again, there's no giants in this one. I must stress that fact in case people don't know. But it's about questioning our motives and what drives us every single day. Whether your life is a living hell or you just want to pick your career in life. It applies to us no matter how different our lives are. From those who lived a millennia ago to us today. And that's Attack on Titan, a historic anime that will go down in history. But my question for you is, what motivates you to click the subscribe button?